In 2019, a 73-year-old antique dealer in Providence, Rhode Island, closed his shop after 4 decades in business. His name was Robert Clancy. He specialized in one thing: mirrors made before 1880. The reason he closed is that 11 customers, over the course of 18 months, reported seeing the same thing reflected in the glass. Not their own face, not their living room, something else entirely. Cities that have no place in the official record of history. Robert kept meticulous records of every mirror he sold and every complaint he received. Before he died in 2021, he handed those records to his granddaughter, who posted them online. What's documented there doesn't fit the timeline we've been given, but it fits perfectly if you've been paying attention to what's been erased. If you're watching this video, hit subscribe right now. I cover suppressed history, architectural anomalies, and the evidence they don't want you examining too closely. New videos every week breaking down what they tried to erase. Robert Clancy didn't set out to become the last dealer of pre-1880 mirrors. He inherited the business from his father, Thomas, who purchased an estate sale in Newport in 1952. The estate had belonged to the Vanderbilt family. Tucked in a storage room were 47 mirrors, each one manufactured before 1880, each with a small brass plate on the back noting the maker's name and year. Thomas sold 32 of those mirrors before Robert took over. Robert inherited the rest, acquired 60 more from estate sales across New England, and built a reputation quietly. If you wanted a mirror from before 1880, you went to Clancy's Antiques on Wickenden Street, Providence, a narrow road lined with brick buildings dating to the 1790s. Robert kept the mirrors in a back room, wrapped in cloth, stored vertically in custom wooden racks he built himself. You had to ask for them specifically. Between 1979 and 2017, he sold 3 or 4 a year. Collectors, decorators, people restoring historic homes, normal transactions, no unusual complaints. Then January 2018 arrived, and something changed. A woman named Patricia Vance purchased a mirror manufactured in 1874. The brass plate read J. Morrison, Boston. She hung it in a hallway in Cambridge, Massachusetts. 3 weeks later she called Robert's shop. She was crying. Patricia told him that when she walked past the mirror at dawn and at dusk, she didn't see her hallway reflected back. She saw a street, a wide boulevard lined with white marble buildings, each one featuring domed roofs and columned facades. Architecture that looked almost Roman, but cleaner, more geometric, more precise. And in the background, barely visible through a haze at the horizon, there was a structure, enormous, pyramidal, but with a flat top, something that caught the light as though its surface was metal or glass. Robert assumed she'd been drinking. Then she told him she was a professor of art history at Boston University. She sent photographs of the mirror, its placement, the lighting conditions. She returned it in March 2018. Robert refunded her money and wrote one line in his ledger: customer reported visual anomaly, possible defect in glass silvering. 4 months later, a man named David Chen, a resident of Burlington, Vermont, purchased a different mirror, made in 1863, brass plate reading Whitmore, Philadelphia. He called in August. He described the exact same thing: wide boulevard, white marble buildings, domed architecture, and somewhere in the distance, barely visible, a massive structure he couldn't identify. Robert started paying attention. Between August 2018 and June 2019, 9 more customers reported the same experience. Out of 23 mirrors sold during that period, 11 callers described variations of the same scene: grand architecture, wide streets, buildings that look like temples rather than houses or commercial properties, and always somewhere at the edge of visibility, a structure too large and too far away to identify clearly. 3 of those 11 customers were architects. 2 were historians. 1 was a structural engineer. Trained observers, people who are professionally resistant to suggestion and fantasy, and they were all describing the same place. Robert set up 5 unsold mirrors in his back room and began his own experiments. He documented temperature, humidity, and the angle of sunlight through the window at different times of day. He sat with the mirrors for weeks. Nothing. Then one morning in September 2019, just after sunrise, he saw it. Not in all 5 mirrors. In one. The mirror made in 1876 by E. Garrett of New York City. Temperature 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 73%. sun approximately 23 degrees above the horizon. The reflection showed a vast open plaza paved in white stone. Buildings 5 or 6 stories high, each one featuring massive columns and arched windows, a fountain at the center of the plaza, a tree-lined boulevard stretching into the distance, and at the very edge of the visible horizon, through what looked like morning mist, that structure again, pyramidal, flat-topped, enormous, shimmering as though its surface was made of something reflective. The detail was not blurred or impressionistic. Robert could see the texture of individual paving stones, leaves on the trees, people, distant but present, moving through the plaza in light-colored robes or long coats, going about what looked like an ordinary morning. He watched for 2 minutes and 37 seconds, then he raised his phone to take a picture. The moment he lifted the camera, the image vanished. His back room reflected back at him exactly as it should. He tried again the next morning, and the morning after that. 6 more days of nothing. The phenomenon appeared once and refused to return. 3 days after his own experience, a woman named Ellen Morrison came into the shop asking about mirrors. She was a librarian in Providence, researching architectural history of New England for a book. Robert tried to talk her out of buying the Garrett mirror. She insisted. He sold it with a signed disclosure agreement warning her of the reported anomalies. 2 weeks later she came back, not for a refund, to show him her journal. Ellen had seen the reflection 4 times, always at dawn, always lasting less than 3 minutes. She had been recording continuously with a camera on a tripod. The phenomenon never appeared on camera, but at the exact moments when she saw the alternative reflection with her naked eye, the audio on the recording captured something. A low-frequency hum, present but not audible to the ear. The frequency measured at 7.83 Hz. Ellen recognized that number. 7.83 Hz is the fundamental Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency generated by Earth's own atmosphere. She had a theory. The buildings visible in the reflection didn't match anything in the documented architectural record of American cities in the 1800s. They didn't match European buildings either, but they matched something she'd been studying closely: the structures built for the World's Fairs of the late 19th century, specifically the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, 1893. The buildings described in contemporary accounts as massive, white, neoclassical, domed roofs, columned facades. The complex the newspapers called the White City. Official history says those buildings were temporary, constructed in 18 months from plaster and wood, demolished after the fair ended. But Ellen had found the photographs, dozens of them, and the buildings in those photographs did not look temporary. The Palace of Fine Arts covered 11 acres. The Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building was, at the time, the largest building in the world, spanning 30 acres under a single roof. The foundation work visible in images showed construction methods used exclusively for permanent structures, and for a project that supposedly employed thousands of workers over 18 months, the documentation of the actual construction process was almost non-existent. Most photographs showed buildings already complete. Almost none showed them being built. The same pattern appeared at every major exposition of the era: San Francisco 1894, Buffalo 1901, St. Louis 1904. Every one featured identical architecture, massive, white, neoclassical, domed. Every one was supposedly demolished shortly after the event ended. The Pan American Exposition in Buffalo featured the Electric Tower, a 375-foot structure covered in 40,000 light bulbs, with foundation work identical to permanent construction. Ellen's conclusion was this: the mirrors were made before the fairs. A mirror manufactured in 1876 cannot capture images from 1893, unless the architecture was already there in 1876, unless the World's Fairs weren't construction projects at all. They were repurposing projects, taking buildings that already existed and rebranding them as temporary exposition structures to explain their presence to a population that was no longer supposed to remember what had come before. This would explain the missing construction documentation. They weren't being built, they were being cleaned, restored, and re-narrativized. Ellen gave Robert her journal. He added it to his records. She had cross-referenced the architectural features visible in the mirrors with historical records from cities across America. 37 buildings across 6 states matching the same style: white marble, neoclassical, domed, all built before 1890, all demolished between 1890 and 1970. In most cases, the buildings that replaced them were significantly less grand. She also documented something else. The people visible in the reflections wore light-colored robes or long coats. Historical texts describing inhabitants of the region labeled on 18th and 19th century maps as Tartaria describe identical clothing. Simple, functional, made from light fabric, not the heavy Victorian dress standard in American and European cities during the same period. The name Tartaria appears on maps throughout the 1700s and 1800s. It refers to a vast region spanning northern and central Asia, sometimes labeled as Tartary or Grand Tartary. Official history treats it as a vague geographic designation, not a civilization. But the maps don't treat it that way. The map shows cities, borders, subdivisions, regions with names. Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Russian Tartary. Political organization. The Encyclopaedia Britannica, 9th edition, published in 1875, includes detailed entries on Tartaria. Describes its government, its culture, its trade routes, its cities. Then, between approximately 1890 and 1920, Tartaria vanishes from the record. Not gradually, suddenly. One edition of Britannica includes extensive entries. The next removes them entirely. An empire spanning millions of square miles disappears from maps and encyclopedias within a single generation. At exactly the same moment, the world's fairs are presenting its architecture to the public as newly constructed temporary buildings. The Roman Empire fell 1500 years ago, and we still use the term. Tartaria, documented as recently as 1875, is treated by modern historians as a cartographic mistake. That is not how terminology evolves. That is how terminology gets erased. Researchers comparing photographs from the fairs with old texts describing Tartarian architecture noticed something else in the images. On the rooftops and towers of the exposition buildings, structures that official history labeled decorative, ornate spires, metal frameworks, spheres or geometric shapes at the apex of the tallest points. Engineering analysis suggests these were not decorative. They were functional. Elevated positions, often 200 feet or higher. Conductive materials, usually copper or iron. Geometric terminal points maximizing atmospheric exposure. The profile of an energy collection system. Nikola Tesla's work on wireless energy transmission was happening during the exact same period. He proposed capturing and distributing electrical power through the atmosphere, eliminating the need for power lines entirely. His Wardenclyffe Tower project, begun in 1901, was designed to transmit power wirelessly across vast distances. J.P. Morgan cut his funding in 1906 after realizing the system could not be metered. If power moved through the atmosphere, there was no mechanism to control access or charge for usage. Tesla's own notes reference ancient systems of power transmission. He studied exposition architecture, examined the towers and spires. He was not inventing new technology. He was reconstructing old technology, and the infrastructure that could have supported his work, the towers and spires visible in photographs from the 1890s, was methodically dismantled in the decades that followed. The timeline assembles itself. Tartaria disappears from the record between 1890 and 1920. World's fairs appear during the same window, displaying architecture identical to descriptions of Tartarian cities, labeled as temporary. Tesla's energy research is suppressed. By 1920, the old world is gone, replaced by a system built on fossil fuels, centralized power grids, and the economic infrastructure of scarcity. After Sarah Clancy posted her grandfather's records online in November 2022, 3 other antique dealers came forward. One in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Savannah, Georgia, one in New Orleans, Louisiana. All 3 specialized in pre-1880 mirrors. All 3 had received similar customer reports over the years and had said nothing, because there was nothing they could say that wouldn't sound insane. The Charleston dealer, Margaret Hawley, mentioned something the Providence records didn't include. Several of her customers had reported seeing symbols in the reflections. Not English, not any recognizable language, geometric characters carved into stone surfaces on the buildings. One customer, a linguistics professor named Dr. James Chin, documented the symbols across 6 separate viewings over 3 months. He ended up with approximately 200 distinct characters. He compared them against every ancient writing system accessible through his university. None matched exactly, but certain symbols showed similarity to Old Turkic, a runic alphabet used in Central Asia between 700 and 1000 AD. Others resembled Sogdian script from the same region. The forum post containing Dr. Chen's sketches was deleted within 3 days of being uploaded. Attempts to re-upload it failed. Multiple users reported the same result across different platforms. If those symbols were carved into buildings standing in American cities before 1920, the buildings were not constructed by the people official history credits with building them. They were inherited from a civilization that spoke a language we are not supposed to remember. The question is always why. Why erase a civilization from the historical record? Why demolish or rebrand its buildings? Why suppress the technology that powered its cities? Control. Whoever controls the energy supply controls everything that depends on it, which is all of modern life. Free atmospheric energy cannot be metered. You cannot charge people for pulling electricity from the air. You cannot cut off supply to enforce compliance. A civilization built on that kind of energy is fundamentally decentralized in a way that makes it ungovernable by the mechanisms that govern us now. So you dismantle the infrastructure. You reframe the buildings as temporary novelties. You rewrite the history books. You suppress the researchers who get too close. And you replace the entire system with one built on scarcity, dependency, and the monthly bill. The pre-1880 mirrors are a problem for that story. They are physical objects manufactured before the reset. Under the right conditions, at the right angle of light, at the right time of day, they show what stood before. They are evidence that cannot be explained away as digital manipulation or modern fabrication. The glass is 3 centuries old. The mercury backing is original. What it reflects is what it saw. Robert Clancy understood exactly where this led. He saw it clearly enough that he chose to close the back room, wrap the last 3 mirrors in cloth, and put them in storage rather than hand the door to someone else to open. He was 73 years old. He had spent his life handling these objects, and only at the end understood what they were. Windows, not into the past as officially recorded, into the past as it actually was. His granddaughter opened the door anyway. The records are public now. The pattern is documented, and the question is no longer whether something was erased. The question is how much of it is still out there, wrapped in cloth in storage rooms, hanging in hallways, waiting for the right angle of light on the right morning. If you own an antique mirror manufactured before 1880, check the back for a brass plate with the maker's name and year. If you find one, pay attention at dawn and at dusk. Low-angle light. Specific atmospheric conditions. If the reflection shows architecture that doesn't match your room, buildings that look too large and too clean and too permanent for the story we've been given, take notes. Document everything you see, because what you're looking at is not a defect in the glass. It's memory. The physical world remembering what it used to be before someone decided we weren't supposed to know. The last dealer of pre-1880 mirrors closed his shop because 11 customers saw the same impossible thing. He spent his final years protecting those mirrors because he knew what they were. Not antiques, not curiosities, evidence of a world that didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it succeeded in a way that made it dangerous to the people who profit from controlling what you need to survive. The mirrors know, the glass remembers, and every reflection is evidence of what they took from us.